Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a Market Research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard. Today, we're joined by Rebecca Brooks, CEO and founder of Alter Agents, a full-service strategic market research consultancy reimagining research in an era of shifting decision-making. Rebecca is an entrepreneur with 20 plus years of experience in the market research industry. She feeds her inherent curiosity by uncovering the complicated paths that consumers take to help clients make better decisions every day. Rebecca's passion for creating a rich, energized, and balanced work environment while delivering exceptional quality and value has created a true culture of collaboration at her company. She is co-author of the upcoming shopper marketing book, Influencer Shopping Decisions, to be published by Kogan Page in April 2022. Thanks for joining us on the show today, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. So, Rebecca, what's the most significant thing you're going to tell us today?
Well, the issue that we've been tracking for the last decade since Devora, my co-author, and I started working on shopper behavior and shopper decision-making. We began in 2009, and the work we did back then fed into Google's zero moment of truth research, which, if you can remember back that far, was when Google needed to prove that search was a part of shopping and people should advertise there. So that kicked us off, and we, her as my client and me on the research side, had been exploring this area for the last decade. And the primary thing and the impetus for writing the book and getting this out there is this rise of shopper promiscuity or promiscuous shopping behavior. And we use that word intentionally. It's a little risque sounding, but the idea is that shoppers are much more open to new brands, new distribution channels, category disruptors. They are much less likely, and we've seen this trend continue over the course of the 10 years that we've been doing this research, much less likely to come into a category with the brand in mind and buy that brand. Now, of course, there's a ton of differentiation between categories and between brands, but that trend is consistent. And when you look at it on a demographic basis, boomers, about 56% of them go into a category with a brand in mind and buy that brand. And that is what I would consider kind of traditional shopping behavior, right? That's how we've thought about shopping behavior, this idea of loyalists who know what they want to buy and they just go buy it regardless of the other inputs they come across. But as you scale that down and you look at Gen X and millennials, it's a stair step down. But when you get to Gen Z, it's a drop down to 36% of Gen Zers start with a brand in mind and buy that brand.
Wow.
And this isn't a generational trend that's going, like Gen Z is not going to age into boomer behavior, right? This is a new way of looking at shopping. They're truly digitally native. They've grown up with all of this access around them, and it's rewiring the way their brains work. So the big idea, the big premise of the book and what we're out here trying to promote is that we have got to change the way that we think about research and the way that we talk about brands with consumers in order to really get the correct insights, because market research has really been set up more around this idea of loyalty. And so we're positing that we're asking the wrong questions of the wrong people and not getting the insights we need.
Very interesting. So we'll come back to this shortly, but first, can you tell us a little bit about Alter Agents and your area of expertise, where this has all come from?
Yeah, of course. Prior to Alter Agents, I was co-running the LA office of Holland Partners. And, when I started working with them back in 2000, they were a really innovative company approaching research very differently. And so I really got to learn from them about how to think about research differently, which appealed to me. I decided to head out on my own because, as with, everything, new ideas are coming and it gets harder to embed those into an organization. So I wanted to try something different, go out on my own. And I almost immediately connected with Devora, who at the time was working at IPG Emerging Media Lab. And they had a remit to try to find a way to understand how shoppers are using new media in their shopping decision process. That kicked off our work. And so we've been working in that space, and then of course more, standard traditional research as well. For the last 11 years, we really tend to focus on the harder questions, the questions that aren't an easy, like, oh, this is a copy test or this is a max diff. We tend to go for the tougher questions. So some of our work that's been published, if people are curious, they can go look at, is like work we did with Snapchat on what does friendship mean during COVID and the isolation that we felt in 2020. And we're kicking off a new research project now with a client about how has inspiration changed, like what inspires us, how has that evolved over the last 2 years. So we tend to delve into that weightier stuff.
Yeah, cool, which is, well, much needed, no doubt.
Yeah.
Cool. So if we jump back into your significant statement before,
Yeah.
you specialize in shopper research. You've recently completed a study of over 6,000 US consumers. Can you give us a bit of a high-level overview of those findings and what you're trying to achieve with that research in mind?
Yeah. So we did 1,000 shoppers in different categories, 6 different categories, and looked at their entire process. And I think it's important for us to, for me to step back a bit and explain why we talked to what we mean by shoppers. In our research, it's people who have recently purchased in the category. So they're not intending, they've actually done a thing, and we're going to go ask them about what they did, like walk us through step by step. And so we're talking to people who actually did something, and the questions are concrete questions. What sources of information did you use? How influential were those? What barriers did you come across? How difficult were those to overcome? About a real event. So they can answer those questions, right? They remember their process and they can talk to you about that process. And I think that's really a critical differentiator from our work versus a lot of work in this space, which tends to be among intenders, which is a much more hypothetical type of work. So we went in and we asked people essentially to walk us through their process in one of these 6 categories that they recently purchased in, and essentially tell us, where did they go for information? How much information did they seek out? How helpful was it, right? And then ultimately, why did they do what they did? Why did they buy the product that they bought or the brand that they bought? And so the book, we really wanted that to be an anchor point for the book. So we could talk about category differences. We could talk about promiscuity levels among different demographics. We could talk about brand successes and failures in terms of their promiscuity levels. So, and it does mirror the Google Zero Moment of Truth research that we did back in 2010. So we've also got some really nice anchor points to show trends over time in the data.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and there's that well-known kind of saying, what people think is different to what people say is different to what people do. And so really focusing on what people have done can help even them sort of process backwards as well. So it's a really nice approach.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was trained in anthropology. That was my education. And there's this great book that came out in the late 80s, I think, called Rubbish, where a bunch of anthropologists went and spoke to people in a neighborhood about what they bought, how many packs of cigarettes, how many cans of soda, and took an inventory from them of what their family consumed that week. Then they went into their garbage, the rubbish, and actually looked at what they had done. And of course, it was entirely different, right? People drank and smoked much more than they said they did. They ate way more ice cream than they said they did, right? So really just sort of illuminating that when we're talking to people in a research capacity, no matter what the questions are, we're going to put our best selves forward. We're going to present the self that we think is the best. So when we're asking intenders about going into a category and what do they think they're going to do, they're going to default towards bigger brands. They're going to default towards the common sort of collective perceptions of things. In reality, when they actually start going into a category and doing their research and learning about things, they're probably going to do something quite different. So based off of that sort of anthropological background that I have and the research we've been looking at, really for us, like speaking to people who have done something and then asking them what they've done has been much more enlightening and a more honest read on the category.
Oh, for sure. Okay. One of the categories that you studied was pet products, a category that we've been exploring at Info Tools as well. Can you tell us some of the insights that you uncovered from recent purchases in this category?
Yeah, it was super interesting. We wanted to pick a variety of categories to get a sense of, how promiscuity levels were differing across categories and shopper behavior. And pet products was interesting to us because, of course, over the last 2 years, we've all become even more engaged with our pets during COVID. We're home with them all day. Pet parenting is really becoming a big thing. So we wanted to look at that. And one of the first things that stood out to us was that people look to more sources of information for buying a pet treat or a pet supplement than they do at buying home furniture. So if you think about, the treat that I'm going to give my dog and that bag may last 30 days versus the couch I'm going to have in my home for 10 years, people's priorities are higher on the dog treats. And there are also 3 out of 4 people who shop in that category make the decision that day. So they are doing a lot of research very quickly. They're using their phones at shelf. They're seeking out a number of sources immediately to help them make that decision. Also, we see that with pet products, one of the best sources of information, the most influential, I should say, people look at a lot of sources, but the most influential in that category is other customers' reviews, particularly reviews that focus on the dog's experience with the product. So people are really crowdsourcing that information from other dog owners and then I think the last thing is that promiscuity is relatively high in this category. Only 50% of people came in with a brand in mind and bought that brand. And if you think about dog treats, now I'm a cat person, so my cats are super finicky, and there are some things they'll eat, many things they won't. So I tend to buy the same thing that I know will work. And I know a lot of dog owners out there have finicky dogs too. And even still, half of those purchases are going to be a brand that they hadn't planned on buying, or they were open to brands going in without a brand in mind. So there's a good level of promiscuity in the category as well.
Yeah, sure. Just thinking of through the pandemic, we've probably seen a lot of new first-time pet owners as well, wanting that companionship, etc. So probably at a younger age group than people have before. So I'm sure that would have played into the results as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that we found with this increase in shopper promiscuity is that when you have all of this information at your fingertips, it actually creates a level of anxiety among shoppers that I don't want to buy the wrong thing, right? If all the information is out there and I go out and buy a treat that has something really bad in it, right? Or the company is behaving in a way that's really unsustainable or unappealing, whether they treat their staff a certain way or how they source their products, whatever it might be. Or, the vast majority of reviews say that it's made their dog sick.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want to be the idiot that makes that purchase decision. You want to know that what you're going into is you're going to buy the right thing. And so it's encouraging people to research more and to shop more. And then when you put pets in the mix, that is a very precious and dear thing for you that, they can't tell you what they need. So there's even more heightened anxiety around, let me make sure I get the right thing. So yeah, it is a category that, even though it's a dog treat, creates a lot of desire within the shopper to feel confident in the decision that they've made, which then ties into other consumers' reviews. Right? People are telling them it's good; they're going to believe that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So out of your past experience and work, plus the data from these later studies, You've come up with something that you call the Shopper Influence Program. That is a new methodology for approaching shopper insights. Can you tell us about this and the formula you use?
Yeah, sure. So the full suite of tools is really a mix of qualitative, quantitative, and neuroscience. But I'll start with the broader sort of methodology, the approach, which is we talk to people who recently purchased in the category.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the category, that can be, within the last 24 hours. If we're talking to people that bought, deli meat or something, you can find folks within that narrow time frame. The more infrequent the purchase is, a little bit harder it is to get close to that recency, but we really push to get as close to recency as possible. We also interview a large number of people because really the only requirement to get into our study is that you bought that product. So demographics, region, any kind of other conditions that people might put on a brand tracker, we don't put on it because what we want to know is who's buying the product. And if we set preconditions, then we're not actually learning who's buying the product that we're selling. So we leave it really wide open, but then we do a large sample size, which allows us to really finely cut the data by brand that was purchased, by people that might have defected. They started with a brand in mind, but then they bought another brand. We can pull them out and take a look at them. So it is recent purchasers, and it is a large sample size. And then it's a very factual questionnaire. We don't ask people hypotheticals or what do you think about? So we ask them what they did and why they did what they did. And so again, going back to, asking the right questions, grounding them in an experience that they just had that's fresh in their minds. And they can walk us through what they did. And then we can use qualitative and neuroscience and other tools to dig into more of the why. But we're left, but the core of it is this really strong, robust quant research that gives our clients a really clean, view of the category. How promiscuous is it? How is their brand being perceived in that category? Where are they losing people, right? People that came in intending to buy their brand and then bought another brand. What happened? We can answer all of those kinds of questions with the research.
Yeah, sure. So feel free to answer this how you want. Are you able to talk to us about some of the results that your clients have had, just at a high level, no specifics required, just about this approach and how the return on investment they've had from these insights?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll try to do this without naming names. One client that we've had, a brokerage client, was really trying to understand, everybody knows that switching financial institutions is painful, but really trying to understand what was the pain point. And so we went in and interviewed people that not only had recently made a financial decision, a banking decision of who they were going to bank with, but also had switched, right? So these are people that had gone from one institution to another. So what was that process like? And the big insight that we uncovered there was that the primary barrier, the hardest barrier for people to overcome in switching to a new bank was that they knew, because this was a financial brokerage institution, they knew at some point they were going to have to talk to a broker before they made the decision to switch. And talking to the broker was it was like a 90% of people did not want to do it. Mm-hmm. And the anxiety about that actually increased as they got closer to making their decision, because they knew it was coming. It was inevitable to having to talk to the broker. And really that was fear of hard sales tactics, fear of, sleazy brokers, uncomfortable conversations. It was even higher among women who felt, of course, that this was a conversation that wasn't going to go in their favor. Just a lot of really good, meaty insight around this is the barrier. It's not your fees. It's not your accessibility or the widgets you have online, right? It's that your brokers better be really good people and easy to talk to. And so that gave our client a really great insight in how to rearrange their messaging, how to train their brokerage staff, how to just, in a variety of levels. If they could address this one pain point and make it easier for those people to come to them than another competitor, it was a big win for them. So that would be an example where I think, traditional research of brand equity and perceptions and, imagery statements and all of that kind of stuff and ad recognition, like that wouldn't have gotten to that brokerage issue the way that we were able to uncover it.
Oh, sure.
I'll give you one more example if we've got time.
Yep.
This one's also really interesting, I think, just for understanding the difference between large brands and small brands, right? So we had a large brand client who was in the audio space. They made audio equipment, headphones, speakers, that kind of thing. And they were dominant. They've been dominant for a long time. But they had market share declining a little bit, a little trickle of market share declining. And really came to us to understand like what's happening here, right? And their tracker showed that their perceptions were high. Everybody thought of them as a really valuable brand. There wasn't anything in that data that indicated a problem. So we go in and we talk to people who recently bought this product. What did you do and how did you do it? And we found that generationally, there was a clear distinction between how Gen X and boomers were buying and how millennials and Gen Z were buying. And the clear distinction was that millennials and Gen Z were using a ton of social media. Obviously, it makes sense now. A few years ago, this was a surprise to this client. And it was a lot of digital word of mouth, right? So people you didn't know personally, but people that you trusted online, sharing about this product. And the brand that was dominant among this younger group was a brand that really wasn't doing television advertising. They weren't doing a lot of the traditional things that would have been on our clients' radar. They were really focused on social media and events, right? So let's go where these kids are and sell to them and get them excited about it. And so it was still a little late for our client. They should have paid attention to that about a year before we were able to get them that information. But when we did, they were able to start making pivots, and those pivots for them, unlike the brokerage example, which were about messaging and convincing people that you had a different offering, these guys had a great reputation. They just weren't where the buyers were. And so that, impact for them was really tactical marketing, right? How do we change our marketing plan, not our messaging, not our product, but how do we change who we're talking to and where we're talking to them? So I think those are two really good examples of how this research can uncover insights that more traditional research just wouldn't, would have been under the radar for it.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so perhaps a tiny little plug here, but as we mentioned before, you have a book coming out in April. Very exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What can you tell us about this book and how it relates to understanding consumer behavior?
Yeah. So there's really two main ideas. The one that you and I have discussed a lot is this idea of shopper promiscuity and how people are changing, and that this isn't, a trend. It's a way of the future. My children, who are 11 and 7, are growing up in a house with an Alexa, and they can just put things on the shopping list. The way that they think about brands and purchase decisions is going to be so different. So we have to accept that this is the new reality that we as marketers are headed into. And so part of it is making the case for that. We have a lot of data in the book from our research over the years and really demonstrate across a number of categories that this is actually happening, right? So canary in the coal mine, this is coming. We need to pay attention to it now. But the other piece of it is really more of a perspective on the way that market research has traditionally approached consumers and decision making, which has been from a very structured purchase funnel perspective, right? I go from unaware to aware to familiar to consider to trial to loyalist. And that's just not happening anymore. Brands need to be in a state of constant acquisition. I may love a product, but I'm going to assume the next time I go out into the category that something's changed, right? There's been some product innovation. There's some new brand out there that people love. There's something new. Every shopper is starting with research on almost every single purchase. And so if you're not able to reconvince people to buy, loyalty really doesn't mean anything. But all of our research, our brand equity research and brand tracking and all of that is really focused on capturing perspectives of intenders, which again is hypothetical, and then capturing this funnel metrics, which we just don't think are analogous anymore. Maybe they weren't ever, but particularly now as people become more promiscuous, they're just not analogous to the shopper's decision-making process. And so what are we giving our clients at the end of the day when we give them, a purchase funnel metrics? What are we actually telling them? And I think the two examples I gave you of the headphones and the brokerage, had they been done in traditional tracking, and actually in both cases, our clients had done a ton of traditional tracking, none of those issues would have surfaced. So we really think that not only are we, acknowledging that this change is coming, but more importantly, that we as an industry really need to rethink the way that we're approaching research, the questions we ask, and who we talk to.
Yeah, sure. Very cool. So if I can sum up what we've talked about today, Rebecca, shopper promiscuity is basically here to stay, and we've had that move away from loyalty, which means we really need to change the way we market research. We have basically become heavily research focused as a consumer. We like to buy within a day. Reviews are essential to us. So we're out there on social media, etc., talking to one another. I know a lot of people call that kind of approach dark social. So you touched on some companies out there really present on social media, and conversations are happening behind closed doors. So you traditional marketing approaches, or companies that take that traditional approach, don't necessarily see what competitors are doing in that space. So it's good when you see that that crossover happen. Thinking in terms of changing that market research mindset, moving potentially away from the intenders to the actual doers, or what people have done, being able to look into that concrete evidence of how people have decided, made their decisions when they bought something. We've also focused on actions taken and how influential they can be, and then potentially relooking as well at the funnel approach, as it doesn't necessarily apply for things going forward. So all things to be considering as we get out there and we continue our market research efforts.
Yeah, that's a great summary. I'll have to take you with me on when I'm talking about things. Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly right. The one final thing, if I could just say that there is one holdout in the category of promiscuity, which in our research has been soda, Pepsi, Coca-Cola. That is the only category we've seen where it's 97% brand loyal. Wow. People know what they want and they buy it. Every other category is, sub 60%, some sub 40%. So, I think just really fascinating to think about how categories are differing, how shoppers are differing. I'd be so curious to see if that soda number holds up in 10 years.
Do you think that's because a lot of those soda categories or companies have really focused on brand marketing? So when you put a lot of effort and focus on that there, then that still does have that loyalty impact?
If I could answer that question, Michael, I don't know. I am a Diet Coke drinker. I can't tolerate anything else. I will not buy anything if it's not there, which has never been a problem until recently with COVID and supply shortages. Heavy distribution, growing up with a preferred brand. I mean, I grew up in the South, so Coca-Cola definitely dominated there. And brand marketing for sure, how you're identified, how you identify with that product. I will say though, to be frank, people are drinking less soda. So that is where the drip is happening, right? People are moving away from soda, but of those that that are still buying soda, their loyalty is really strong.
Sure.
I think if you ask a waiter who has to say, I'm sorry, we don't have Coke, we only have Pepsi, and gauge the reactions that people have to that, or vice versa, they'll let you know how loyal it is. Yeah.
True. Okay. Well, a big thanks for joining us on the show today, Rebecca.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
That's all right. And for the listeners out there, if you've liked what you've heard today, please subscribe to the podcast. Feel free to share it with others who might also find it helpful. Also, feel free to get in touch if you'd like to be on the show too. Keep an eye out for Rebecca's book as well. No doubt that'll be a good and interesting read. So come April, you can head over. Where will people be able to find it, Rebecca?
Anywhere that you can buy a book. So
awesome.
It's available. And for an easier thing, if you want to go to our website, you can find a link on there to purchase or pre-order at this point.
And so there'll be alteragents.com, is that right?
Alteragents.com. That's nice. Right. Actually, yeah. Thank you.
That's all right. Cool. So thanks for listening, everyone, to Now That's Significant.